What fills you up? That's a question that we don't phrase that way very often, but I wanted to ask it this morning. Friday, we were at the Midwestern Caring Hearts Gala. I think a number of you were there with us, and we got to be filled up with a good work, or an evening targeted to supporting a good work. If you're not familiar with that evening, if you're not familiar with Midwestern Children's Home, you should consider learning more about it. It is a true good work on this earth, and it's been a true good work for many, many years. The event is a dinner, and then there's a live auction, and then there's a silent auction. But before you do all of that, you eat this dinner. And so we were sitting at a table with Ben McDonald. And if you know Ben McDonald, Ben likes desserts a lot. And he has a plan whenever we have this dinner of what desserts we're going to get. He might get some input from his wife, Shelley. Shelley has some preferences, and there's this plan. And the person that gets our dessert, there's a dessert dash, by the way. I didn't tell you that. There's a dessert dash where you race and you bid to see who can go first. And so we never get first. So we're left with a dessert that maybe you want. Maybe Shelley doesn't want it. But Philip's our runner. Philip is the runner every year. So he gets this little flag. Who else has run? All right. So you know what Philip goes through. It's a little bit of pressure, isn't it? I mean, you have to make some decisions real fast. What dessert you're going to get, and you got people flying around, you're going like this and everything. There might be a little pushing and shoving. And then Philip has in the back of his mind, Shelley is not going to like what I pick. Shelley has a list. Shelley's got a list of things that she doesn't want to see back when it's dessert time. Shelley does not want to see fruit. She doesn't want anything fruity. And she's got some other rules. And we had this great plan of 1, 2, and 3. And it was all gone. So Philip picked the fruity cake. He picked a fruity cake. And Shelley, I think if there was a trap door underneath Philip's chair, she would have hit it when he came back. But you know, we cut it, we ate it, and Shelley actually liked it. She actually liked it. And she gave Philip some praise for getting this fruity cake. But you know, we were filled up. We're filled up with a lot of good things there. I don't think Ben got filled up. He doesn't get filled up very well. Ben actually bid on the same auction item repeatedly without any competition himself. But it was for a good cause. Okay. So we are to look for things that fill us up in the right way. Okay? And we know this, but it's one of these things that we really need to be reminded of. So let's look at what in our life. Could you advance the slide one, please? Let's look in our life what we often have as things that have a difficult time. We have a difficult time managing. We can't manage these things very well. So I don't think we can manage the slides very well this morning either. There we go. Thank you. All right. So I've talked about phones before, and I'm going to talk about it again this morning. I drive my family nuts about it. We have a phone problem. Who will admit that you have a phone problem? Raise your hand. Those of you who aren't raising your hand are fibbing. You got a phone problem and you won't admit it. And I can prove it. Give me your phone. I can prove it. I can give me your code. I'll look on it. In our house, we have there's a setting that shows what you go and visit and how much time you spend on different apps and things. You can turn that on. I've told my wife right there, she's sitting right there, she won't turn it on. I said, do you turn it on? She says, no. Ignorance is bliss. I don't want to know. We have a phone problem. And I was thinking about this. What other device or item, not device, anything that you will take into the bathroom with you, name 5 things that you'll take into the bathroom with you. I don't think you'll get past 1 or 2. And one of them's the phone. That's one of the reasons why you don't want to take somebody else's phone. So, okay, who's got their phone with them right now? All right, who's got their Bible with them right now? Do you know that there are more people with their phones than with their Bibles? I know what you're thinking. And we're going to talk about that. All right. So, what else do we have problems with? Go back to the previous slide. So what else do we have problems with? We've got Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat, blah, 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 blah. There's something else coming up every day, seems like, on that category. Do you have a problem with that? Does that fill you up? How many hours a day do you look at that? Are you compelled to look at it? Do you know that the people, some of you probably know this, but do you know that the people that design these social media sites oftentimes design them so that you will be addicted? That you cannot get away from them. Just one more thing. I'm going to send a message to somebody, and then an hour later, you're like in the time warp. What happened? That's designed that way. Maybe you're somebody that doesn't like those things, but you like the news, and you hang out on the news. Maybe it's you like hanging out with your friends, maybe a little too much. Maybe it's your favorite hobby. Maybe it's your favorite sport team, Wes. Maybe it's shopping, kids, job, school, YouTube, Netflix. Okay, Netflix, Prime Video, Hulu. These items are a big deal. These items really trick us, don't they? We think hey, was that user error? Yes. That was user error. It's okay. It's okay. If you've been the victim of user error, you know how it feels. You can make fun of me later. Okay, so when you sit down and watch a show, okay, raise your hand if you've done this. You sit down to watch a show, and it's going to be a half an hour or 45 minutes, maybe an hour. 3 hours later, you're still watching the next episode, the next episode, the next episode. Who's done that? They designed it to do that too. It auto starts in like 10 seconds, and you're like, I'm here, so I'll just watch it. So it is a problem. These things fill us up. They fill up our time, they fill up our attention, they fill up our money, they fill us up. But are they satisfactory? Are they satisfactory? Do they fill you up permanently? We'll talk about that. We know the answer. But why do we do these things? Why? The easy answers are they're entertaining. We can get some things done with them. They feel good. We like to do them. They give us a little bit of an endorphin shot. Hey, yeah, somebody liked my post. And perhaps there's a little bit of addiction if you use the term addiction loosely. Maybe there's a little bit of that. I think it goes deeper than that, though. I think we're running from things when we fill ourselves up with these other things. We're running from experiences, bad things. We're running from things that happened to us in the past or things that we've done in the past that we haven't dealt with. We're running from things that we expect into the future that may not be pleasant. We're running from things that we don't feel good about. So I think we also do these things because we're selfish. But there's a bigger category. I think we're avoiding, when we fill ourselves up with all of these things, we are avoiding, and sometimes not consciously, sometimes consciously, we are avoiding the confrontation of important things in our lives, of correcting our action. If I am mistreating my wife, which may or may not happen sometimes. If I'm mistreating my wife regularly, I need to correct that. But if I don't exert the willpower and spend the time to do that, I don't make it happen. I'm watching Netflix. I'm watching Instagram. I'm watching Fox News. And then tomorrow comes, and I treat my wife the same way. We all have little things in our lives or big things in our lives that need to be corrected. And we don't do it because we're distracted doing these other little things. A spiritual call to action. Do you know that you're being called to do something by God right now? As you sit in your seat listening to me, you are being called to do something. And if you say, I don't know what that is, what are you talking about? Then maybe you're distracted. Maybe you're distracted. You don't just have one spiritual calling in your life. God just doesn't just wave something over your consciousness and say, hey, this big thing, I want you to go on a mission trip. Then you go on the mission trip and you're done. Then you just go ahead and watch Netflix for the rest of your life. You've done it. God has a spiritual call to action for us, I think, at all times. He has something for us to do. And if you don't know what that is, you need to figure it out. And the way we figure it out is not by filling ourselves up with all these other things. Another huge thing in our life, our collective lives, is this anxiety and worry of things. You know, Jesus knew that anxiety was going to be such a big deal and worry was such a big deal that he talked about it. He gave it a pretty good-sized paragraph in the Sermon on the Mount. And if we did the raise your hand thing again, I'm not going to do this, but and say who struggles with anxiety or worry about something, if you don't raise your hand, you're not alive. Everybody does this. There's medication that we take for this to try to manage it. One of the things that we do in our everyday life is to get away from it, is to go involve ourselves in something on that list. If you didn't see yourself on that list, then put your thing on that list. We get involved in those things, and anxiety and worry kind of is pushed off to the side because we're distracted now. So, how do you feel when you're filled with these things? Now, if you watch that Netflix show for 3 hours and you get up and it is now 1 o'clock in the morning and you normally go to bed at 11, how do you feel at 1 o'clock in the morning? Tired. Do you feel guilty? A little bit. A little bit. Feel like you wasted a little bit of your life? Feel like you went a little overboard? If you sit down and eat an entire dessert, Ben, how do you feel after you do that? Huh? Almost full. He did say, he ate, there was a spare chair at our table. He ate the spare salad, he ate the spare entree, and afterwards he says, I don't even feel anything. But after you eat that dessert more than you should, how do you feel? After you spend night after night or all weekend perhaps with friends and you've neglected your family or neglected your work or neglected your Bible study, how do you feel? You don't feel filled up, do you? You might feel tired. You might feel ready to go to bed. You might feel ready for something else. You might come home and I'm ready for some Netflix. We'll go from one of these things to the next. And we constantly fill ourselves up with this. And you know what's interesting about this is, I know it when you said, several people said this, who has their Bible? People say, well, it's on my phone, right? Who said that? Yep, it's on my phone. So that is the tricky part of this. Some of this stuff we can actually use to be spiritual, to do what God wants. Some of the stuff we actually can, like that. But I think we're a little deceptive. I think we kind of fool ourselves sometimes. What do? We say, I'm going to go on social media and I'm going to send something encouraging. I'm going to invite somebody to church, and then that takes 2 minutes, and then you're on it for another hour, doing whatever. You say, I'm going to read my Bible on my phone. I'm going to do my Bible plan, and that takes 15 minutes. And then 2 hours later, your eyes are hurting because you're staring at your phone. I mean, I am not trying to put us down. What I'm trying to do is raise awareness, kind of bring it back to the forefront of our minds, that these things can be deceptive. And I think the devil uses these things subtly, sometimes very, very forcefully, which we're not going to go into some of those ways, but the subtle aspect of it, I think he uses to kind of creep up on us and let us be deceived by our thoughts. That the devil's not going to convince the people in this room that we should follow him, right? But if the devil can make us not do anything, then he kind of wins. If the soldiers stay at home, what battle are they going to win? Yeah, we're in it for our country. We're in it for protecting our society, fill in the blank. But they stay at home, what happens? They lose. So if we are kept at home, kept on the sidelines, and deceive ourselves that we're actually doing something, then it's not happening. It's not happening. So I'm encouraging us to look at this. So just a few scriptures on deception, because this is kind of a deep topic. I'm just going to touch on it for a minute. But we deceive ourselves, and the Bible tells us we deceive ourselves. So don't fall for your own tricks. Don't fall for the devil tricks, but don't fall for your tricks too. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who could know it? Let no man deceive himself, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving ourselves. We know that one. Well, let's stop for a second on that one. So how do we deceive ourselves? It's exactly what we just said. We deceive ourselves because we hear the word and we think that we're doing something by hearing it. Oh, we should get credit because we sat here and listened to something and we heard it. That's not doing anything. You're still sitting there. You're deceiving yourself that you're doing something when you're not. This one I I think is profound. Let him not trust in emptiness, deceiving himself, for emptiness will be his payment. All that list, most of the time, is emptiness. And when we trust in that, we get emptiness back. When we fill ourselves up with emptiness, what are you? You're empty. If you're filled with air, there's not a lot of substance to that. And you don't feel good about it. You can deceive yourself. You can convince yourself that all these things are good and that you're doing what God wants you to do. But are you really? But the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desires for other things enter in and choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. Same principle. Deceitfulness causes us to do nothing. All right. I want to talk about the Israelites for just a second, for a couple minutes. If you would turn with me to Exodus 16. And we're going to jump into the time with the Israelites where they were just out of Egypt, okay? So I want to remind you that this is approximately 1,400 years before Jesus was on the earth. I think it's 1,200 to 1,400. We'll just call it 1,400 is the estimate. So around 1,400 years before Jesus was on the earth, the Israelites are in the desert. So let's set the scene. They had just come out of Egypt. How did they get out of Egypt? Remember, they were in slavery for a long, long time. And Moses went to the Pharaoh and said, let God's people go. He said, no, there were all the plagues. You remember all the plagues? You probably don't remember all of them. I didn't remember all of them until I looked them up yesterday. But there were 10 plagues. 10 plagues that God sent on, undeniably, that God sent on the earth. They just appear. All of these things. Lice, frogs, darkness, blood for a river. Death of the firstborn was the thing that sent them out. And Pharaoh said, finally, get out of here. So they leave. They go to the Red Sea. Pharaoh says, wait a second. Who's going to do all our work? Let's go get those people. So he tries to go get them back. God parts the Red Sea. The Israelites troop right down the middle, come off the other side. Pharaoh's hustling it up with his people to try to go catch them. He gets into the Red Sea. Bam, they're all dead. Holy cow, that's some pretty spectacular event. Sequence of events, rather. The Israelites had just come through this. If you look in verse 1 of chapter 16, it says that this was about the 15th day of the second month since they'd been freed. So 2.5 months after all of this stuff had happened, the Israelites are doing what? Grumbling. They're grumbling because they say they're hungry. All right, so let's track here with me. Let's read verses 11 and 12. And the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. That's profound. I'm going to send from heaven things for you to consume, bread and meat, and you will know that I'm your God. You cannot think, see, there's the fun. You cannot think that it comes from any other source. There is no other place for it to come from. It is right there on there. In fact, we're not going to read it, but when it came down, the Israelites said, what is this? When it first came. They didn't know what it was. It didn't look like anything else they had ever seen. This manna, this bread from heaven. Folks, we're the Israelites. Do you know that? We're the Israelites post-Jesus. And Jesus is the bread. Jesus is represented in this story actual event, 1,400 years before he was on earth. God made this happen this way. He used this sequence of events to lay out and foreshadow what Jesus was to us. Okay? We're going to talk about that in a minute. Verse 21. Morning by morning they gathered it, each as much as he could eat. Ben would gather more than the rest of us, but he would get enough to eat for the whole day. So would we all. And then the next day, they get more. And then the next day, and the next day. You know how long they did this for? 40 years. Look at verse 35. The people of Israel ate the manna 40 years till they came to a habitable land. What was that habitable land? It was the promised land. The promised land, Canaan. They ate the bread until they went into the promised land when they didn't need it anymore. Right? We are in the desert right now. We're the Israelites. We're living in the desert. We have been saved from slavery to sin. If you're a Christian, you've been saved from slavery to sin. You're living in the desert right now. Jesus is the bread. Jesus is the thing that we live on, the thing that we need, and we need him until we get to the promised land. Because he provides this connection between God and us because we can't do it. Jesus is the bread in this story. All right, let's skip forward now. Oh, actually, well, I'll skip that. Let's go to John 6. So in John 6, again, 1,400 years down the road, Jesus is talking, and he's talking about this event. He's going to talk about it. Starting in verse 26. This is the crowds talking to Jesus after he had fed them with the fish and loaves. He left, and they're looking for him, and they want to find him. They want some more of what he was telling them. So they're looking for him. Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you are seeking me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you, for on him God the Father has set his seal." So, do not work for the food that perishes. He says, you're coming to me because I just fed you. And you think Jesus just sort of, it was a coincidence that all that happened? This is divine planning and inspiration. Jesus is laying this out so that the Israelites, the people who are following him, who know what happened to their forefathers, can get it. And then now we get it. Now we get it. Don't work for things that perish. Okay, so they say, what must we do to be doing the works of God? What do we do then, Jesus? And Jesus answered him, this is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent. That's the work of God. So the belief is not simply a belief, right? So can you just say, I believe in something, and it not be apparent, something really deep and substantial that your life is built on? Can somebody take a look at your life and say, that person believes that, without even talking to you? I think so. If someone were to look at your life, could they tell someone else who doesn't know you, that person right there believes, that person is a believer? And it's not because they heard you say something or because they heard you write something down. It says, I believe in Jesus. It's because they see the evidence of your belief. Belief produces a change in people. It produces a process that is manifested in action. You can't strongly believe in Jesus and be the same. You can't. And I think that's what belief is here. Goes on. So they said to him, then what sign do you do that we may see and believe you? What work do you perform? Well, how about he just fed you? But that's the way we are. We need continual reassurance. Our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written. He gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus then said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. What's the true bread from heaven? Jesus is the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. They said to him, Sir, give us this bread always. Then Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. So Jesus is what fills us. That is truly what we need in our lives. All right? It's not just a statement. If you don't know what your mission is, then you need to go back and be filled again. You know what's neat about this is it's just like the Israelites needed to come up every morning to be filled. We need to be filled. You know what? I think every morning is probably about right. Don't you? Just like the Israelites needed to be filled physically. Every morning, don't we need spiritual fulfillment? To be regassed? Something to consider. What are you doing to fill yourself with the right things? I wanted to draw this connection here with you because this, I believe, when you're talking about building your faith, one of the biggest things that builds my faith is seeing the prophecies or the foreshadowing of Jesus. These people, they were totally different human beings that put this stuff on paper over a long, long time. It could not have been planned out by a human being. So God orchestrated a great salvation of his people from slavery in Egypt. He orchestrated a great salvation of his people, us, from slavery to sin. God's people crossed into the desert and must rely on him. In the desert, there's nothing. You have to rely on God. They had to rely on God. God's people, we live in the world, which is the desert. And we have to rely on him because we cannot connect with God ourselves. God fills his people with bread from heaven. God fills his people today with bread from heaven. God's people are filled with bread every morning for 40 years while waiting to reach the promised land. Every morning for 40 years. If you use 40 years as a lifetime, I know we live longer than 40 years, but if you live 40 years as a lifetime, that is a representation of how much we need to be filled continually. God's bread from heaven is no longer necessary after the people cross into the promised land. And you know what? Once we cross into the promised land, we don't need Jesus to connect us with God anymore because we're living there with him. We may still need Jesus, but we don't need that connection anymore because we're there. We've made it. This is part of God's plan. It's part of his plan for you to be filled. He wants you to be filled with the right thing. So what are we to do? So I thought of just a visual representation of this. Everything on the left column, you don't have to worry about reading it. Everything on the left column was something we showed up a couple different times. I just shrunk it so it fits. If this screen is your life, and you do all of those things on the left, or some of those things on the left, shrink it. Shrink it. Minimize it. Make it less. Cancel out what you can cancel out. There's dual purpose for these things. You can use your phone for good and bad. We all know that. You can use Facebook and Instagram for good and bad. We all know that. But shrink it. Minimize it. And you make word for the spiritual things. and you put those things in your life and you make it happen. And your life looks a little bit different. You feel a little more full. You feel a little more sustained. I think that's what we need to do. If you need some prayers this morning, if you need to be filled this morning, if you need to be saved this morning, this is the time to do it, or a time to do it. If you'd like to, our elders will be happy to talk to you this morning.